Welcome everybody to Kraken Cast. Happy Pride, everybody. Today we are joined by a fantastic and an inspiring creator known as EricaPlz. Erica has been streaming on Twitch for quite a while. Their content is amazing, it's informative, and we are really happy to be able to get to know Erica more today. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Erica.
Hello, thank you for having me. This is so exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you. I'm pretty pumped to be able to do this podcast with you. So just kind of kicking things off for people who might not be familiar with you and your content. Can you talk a little bit about the content that you make on Twitch as a creator?
Yeah, so I do a variety of things. I don't really necessarily fit into one single bubble. I started as an art streamer a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago. And then after about 6 months, I went into horror games for a long time. And now I sometimes dabble in retro. So I do a lot of things. I speedrun Resident Evil 7, where I'm 19th in the world for that. And yeah, I just like to have a fun environment. We can be lewd but not rude. If you do things without consent, you will get booed. So when you're in my space, just treat each other kindly and you should be able to get along with anybody.
I love that sentence right there. You can be lewd, but you can't be rude. That's a fantastic way to approach things.
Yeah, we're definitely like an 18+ community, but within that, if you're not respecting each other and if you're trying to push each other's boundaries, then you know, we'll have a talking to, and then hopefully we can just have a good time and not worry about it.
Yeah, and respect is just like the most important thing. I think that's a lot of what the world really needs, and it's great that you foster a community that has that, because it's about consent, it's about boundaries, and it's about respect. You can have a great time. It also takes us a little bit of having respect for your fellow community members.
Yeah, absolutely. It starts on an individual basis, and if you continue to foster that on an individual basis, you can hopefully spawn a nice community that's full of all of that type of those values. Yeah,
I really want to get into the speedrunning of things and all of the stuff that you're currently doing, but I also kind of like to start with the path. Everybody has such a unique path to hitting go live. Some people just do it on a whim, some people really think it through. I'm just kind of curious, what led to hitting the go live button on Twitch? What made you decide one day, okay, I'm gonna go live, put myself out there, and just see what goes on?
Well, about a year before I went live for the first time, my best friend from childhood actually became a streamer. He's a speedrunner. He's got world records in many games, and I just remember him being like, hey, I'm gonna start streaming on Twitch, which I never even heard of, but he's like, hey, if you want to, like, you know, we can hang out and chat a little bit while I play these games. So I got an account, and I checked nobody out for that first year. I literally just watched my friend, and then he rated a streamer who was so inspiring to me. Like, after a few times of seeing the streamers community, which was a medium tier community, but she had cultivated that type of community with respect, where anybody of any race or gender or sexual orientation was welcome. I suddenly saw the potential of what Twitch could be, like, to build a community around stuff. And so, as also someone who was a performer before Twitch, I was like, this is a great place to maybe foster a little bit of my performance skills and maybe make a community that I enjoy hanging out with.
That's really, really awesome. And I always like to hear that. I've been around Twitch for quite a while. I started watching Twitch back a little bit before Twitch plays Pokemon, so having seen it kind of evolve from really just a space for gamers to the space that it is now, where it's still for gamers, but also just has a lot more elements of we have just chatting, we have travel, we just have so many avenues to express ourselves, and we can do it directly in a unique way. And that's kind of something I wanted to also talk about, is like any form of creation that you do, usually even with audience feedback and like improv and stuff, isn't quite the same as what we do on Twitch, where, you can read your comments on a YouTube video, but here we are directly interfacing with chat with the people watching us on a one-to-one basis from the get-go. And I'm just curious, as somebody, you mentioned you had a performing background, how it is on Twitch and how it was on Twitch initially, having that just direct interaction from the get-go with the people who are watching your content.
Yeah. So I think something that's important to know about me is that I have training in being a clown, which, some people are like, a clown? No, I'm scared. And I'm like, if you're scared of a clown, that's not a real clown. That's like probably a demon disguised as a clown, or a serial killer disguised as a clown. It's not a real clown. If you fear it, it's not a clown. Um, but the thing about clowning that you learn and cultivate is that very present relationship to audience. Like, particularly like theatrical clowning is what I mostly have done. I've done a little bit of street clowning, and I once got hired for a birthday, which I hated, but oh well. But I'm used to that instant feedback of like throwing something out into the audience and getting that instant laughter or response in some type of way. Um, Being a Twitch streamer, you don't get that immediate response because like I'll throw out a joke and sometimes people will LOL or whatever, but sometimes they don't. Really though, I'm just a person talking to a camera, and hopefully what I'm saying is landing. And you also have like the 5 to 10 second delay sometimes where it's like, oh well, that didn't land, and then all of a sudden you're on to the next thing, but people are now getting the joke or whatever. So it's a strange medium that as a performer I had to get used to. um but it's, especially because then of literally a few months after I started going live, the Panini hit, and I was in a theater company at the time, and we had to like shut down because of COVID, and this was like became my only outlet for creativity for a number of months, for sure. And I just, I still enjoy it. I'm someone who has busked a lot on street corners, well, especially when I lived in LA, and so there's something about creating content that brings people to you and gets them to like brighten up their day, or feel like a little less alone in the world. That's ultimately what I love to do on this platform.
That's really great. Also, you brought up busking. That's actually one of the ways what I always describe what we do on Twitch. As somebody, I live in the Pacific Northwest. While I'm in Portland now, I've spent my fair deal of time up in Seattle. So busking is something I'm very, very familiar with. People performing on the streets. For people who don't know what busking is, or don't recognize the initial term, it's basically if you've ever seen somebody doing music, or entertaining or things on, at like Pike Place Market in Seattle or on the street, usually have something out if you want to throw them a tip or a donation. That's what busking is, because some people aren't familiar with the term. So that's why I was kind of Twitch is in a lot of ways like that to a online audience, and sometimes a much bigger audience. But at the same time, I think that's, since you have familiarity with that, even though like you mentioned, there's a lot of differences between like instant feedback and like delayed feedback and stuff. I've always found them to be very similar in that regard, because you're trying to entertain people, trying to brighten their day, and you're engaging with an ever-changing audience. You're not sure who's actually listening or not listening as they're going by. So it's a lot of the same skills. So I think it's really interesting that you kind of brought those skills both as an entertainer, as a clown, and having done busking and stuff to Twitch.
Yeah, it's definitely like, I think that's such a great. I've always used busking as a metaphor for what I do on Twitch, particularly to my theater friends. But the way you describe, like the way like when you're busking, sometimes people are just walking by, and no matter what you do, they're not stopping. They're on their way to something, and that is a really apt metaphor that I've actually never thought about Twitch before. And like, hopefully, then you find something to do that grabs them and gets a couple people to stop, and maybe a few more people will stop, and a few more, and maybe you'll generate a crowd and do whatever you're gonna do for them, and hopefully then maybe they'll throw you a couple bucks if they really enjoyed what you do, and that's like the dream.
Yeah, that's definitely the dream. And before we roll on, I do want to talk a little bit, since you do have that background in being a clown. You mentioned if you're afraid of a clown, that's not really a clown. As somebody who had to overcome my fear of clowns, my introduction to clowns, my parents really never got clowns or anything when I was a kid. So as a young kid, HBO was playing on the TV screen, and this movie came on. I don't think my mom realized, because of the name clowns in it, that Killer Clowns from Outer Space was probably not a movie for a 8-year-old child. So
I do remember that movie well. Yeah. No, that's not like an 8-year-old movie.
Well, now it's very comical. If I go back and watch it, it's a fantastic B-rate movie for anyone who hasn't seen it. But yeah, it was my introduction. So for a while there, I was like, oh, they're gonna kill me, wrap me in cotton candy, and drink my blood. But yeah, no, not what clowns actually do.
Right. No. Yeah. No. I have a very precious. I get really amped up about clowning because a lot of people. Their experience of clowning is so superficial, and it's a very beautiful art form when done well. But most people just see birthday clowns or clowns who are actually aliens or demons or blah
Yeah.
blah blah. It's like and I really, the heart of a true clown is just like the most beautiful thing ever because they're so like open and vulnerable with the audience. My clown teacher has this phrase that I live by: is that you need, as a clown, you need to fill the stage with so much life that the audience is so overcome with emotion that they rip the theater apart, the walls, the seating, and they run into the streets screaming, "I know what it is to live. I've seen these clowns."
That's awesome. Can you talk a little bit more just about what led you to wanting to, get into clowning and all of that? Because I think it's really interesting. Because again, that was my first scary clowns that used as a media trope, and then obviously like birthday clowns at a friend's party. But yeah, I don't think I ever really understood clowns as an actual art form until, and I come from a small town. Honestly, rodeo clowns I think were one of my first introductions to what I thought was like just an amazing, like that's when I first saw clowning as a performance versus like a birthday clown doing balloon animals or a TV movie thing. Actually, the performance of it all, because it looks like a very dangerous thing there. And then obviously I've been to more productions, I've been to things in Vegas, so like my introduction was through those like superficial levels to like seeing it as a true performance. So I'm just curious what led you to that as a performance art, if you wanted to talk a little more about that.
Yeah. It's so funny because I didn't go to clown school to study clown. The alumni of this school, we like to joke that it's clown school. It's actually like a physical theater school
Okay.
in Northern California, but it's very well known for its clown component. Many alumni have gone on to work with Cirque du Soleil. I have many friends who work in Vegas all the time with either Cirque du Soleil or they had a group that does Absinthe, whatever. But my story, what brought me to that school was I actually almost quit theater in my undergrad. I studied theater in my undergrad. I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Theater Performance. And it was my junior year. And the teacher, the head of the BFA program, just for whatever reason, she and I did not get along together. We were two Scorpios who were just fighting each other constantly. There was nothing I could do to appease her. And I just, even after just 1 year, I was like, I want to. I almost quit. I almost quit that major. I almost quit theater forever. And it took my favorite teacher, who was directing Shakespeare's Comedy of Errors. I had a heart-to-heart with him, and he's like, "Look, if you still want to act, you can be you've got a spot in Comedy of Errors." So I took that, and as part of that production, we did a weekend workshop with this performer who was teaching us slapstick comedy. And I also realized now, in retrospect, he taught a little bit, tiny little intro to clowning in that workshop. But he was an alumni of this school, and he talked about it. He had his own theater company. And at the end of this workshop, he showed us clips of his theater company. And I had never seen the type of theater that his company did. Again, physical theater, devised original work. My understanding of theater is you go out, you audition, you get hired, you get cast, you do your role, boom, you get a paycheck, hopefully. But what he and his group were doing were they make their own shows. They whatever they're interested in exploring, they would do it. And these clips from the show is like they're very acrobatic, and it could go from highball, zany slapstick comedy to all of a sudden this really beautiful, poetic, expansive moments that just like rip your heart apart and make you feel alive. And I was like, whatever that is, that's the type of theater I want to make. So he and I actually ran into each other a little bit over the course of the next year, and he told me more about the school that he went to, and I decided that if I was going to go, I would apply to that school if I was going to get any more training post undergrad. And it's so weird. I was married at the time, and my now ex-wife was planning to go to law school in San Francisco, which is like just down. The school that I went to is just a few hours north of San Francisco, and I thought, well, that'd be great. I mean, I could come to San Francisco on the weekends. We could hang out. We'd also be apart on the weekdays, blah, blah, blah. So I got accepted in the clown school. Then she decided not to go to San Francisco and went to the opposite coast. And we spent like a little bit of like, basically my marriage fell apart at clown school. It literally started a divorce during the clown unit. There's nothing more hilarious to me than getting a divorce during clown. Every day I'm expected to be funny in class, and meanwhile my personal life is just crumbling apart. And I always tell, whenever I meet current students from that school, I always say, when they're like, do you have any advice? I'm like, don't get a divorce during clown. That's my only piece of advice. So that was my journey on how I got there. And it was a wild, wild ride.
That does sound like a wild ride. And I'm glad you said it's also kind of comical, because I chuckled. I'm like, I hate to be chuckling at a divorce, but it's the circumstances of it, not the actor. It's a bit comical.
Yeah, I mean that was like 12 years ago, and believe me, I look back and laugh now, but at the time,
I know. Yeah, at the time, that's probably
thing ever.
Yeah. I also have a background in theater. I ended up not going into it. Mine is on the lighting and sound design, set design, technical end of things. So I was always interesting to hear about people's kind of like path through that, for anybody who was either a theater kid or actually went to like higher education for theater, because it's such a unique atmosphere. What kind of ends up like grabbing people into that kind of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, a lot of people are like, well, a theater degree, what are you going to do with that? And like, even if you don't end up going into theater, there's so many skills like ensemble building and how do you work together to make this thing happen, and project management, public speaking, writing, all this stuff is, there's a lot of great skills you pick up from studying theater. And I always, if someone is at all slightly interested in that, I always encourage them that way.
Yeah, I think with degrees, especially, like if you're lucky, you can go to school for something you really want to do, and then you end up have that be your career path. But I always kind of look at it the same way, because I have I probably have the 2 degrees most memed on, which is my original degree is in theater arts with a focus on technical theater, and then when I went back to university, I got an English degree focusing on Asian literature, and people are like, "What do you do with either of those?" I'm like, "Well, now I stream, but." It's like you said, it's the skills you build, especially in theater. Like you said, public speaking, working with a group. There's like just so many things that have lent themselves to other parts of my life that even if I ended up not going to theater, which I didn't, they've helped me. They've helped me even with like more mundane careers, just because I know how to work with personalities, and how to deal with conflicting personalities to still get a project done, which not every production has conflicting personalities, but it is theater. So sometimes they do.
Yeah, definitely. I think back to college and some of the teachers who were sometimes your director or designers for productions. I just remember stage managing. The nice thing about my university is like you have to do stage managing at least once. You have to do lighting at least once. You have to do costumes, set building at least once in your like 4 years. And my turn for stage managing, I got the most toxic group of directors and designers and choreographers. Like, it was so bad we had to have the chair of the department sit in our production meetings because it was going so poorly, and people like the choreographer and the director refused to be in the same rehearsal room at the same time.
Oh gosh.
That's how bad it got. And I was a stage manager just trying to make it work, which it did, and it ended up being a fine production, but it was full of tension, and it was a huge learning lesson on how to manage a bunch of personalities.
Yeah, and that's an amazing skill to have. Speaking of dealing with a lot of personalities, or even sometimes toxic personalities, as a fellow LGBT queer streamer, I kind of want to use that to segue into that. Just your experiences. Obviously, you're trans. You're very out and open about that in terms of content, in terms of what you do on stream. So I'm just curious if you can talk about that, because obviously it's amazing because we have the ability to find people who can come to us who go, oh, I share this, and this is something I find a creator who I can identify with because we're both trans, or in my case, we're both genderqueer and things like that. I think that's amazing. But at the same time, we also have to deal with, well, I'll just be honest, with the hate and the bigotry and things like that. So I'm just curious, your experiences, good and bad, as being a trans creator.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, it's as equal. There's as much bad, unfortunately, as there is good. The good stuff, though, is that I somehow, at some point in my life, learned that once I overcome something, it's my duty to be a beacon for the next person who might be struggling with the same thing. So I take it very seriously, the idea that me as a trans streamer on Twitch, it is my job to be a beacon for others who maybe they don't know their gender situation at that moment, but they're questioning, or maybe they know everything and they're just looking for some more trans content creators to follow, or or maybe they're just people who are completely cis heterosexual and they have no stake in anything, but they're really good allies or whatever. Like, being a beacon for all these people to come together is really important. And I've had a lot of beautiful moments. I've had a lot of beautiful moments of people who've been in my community for a long time all of a sudden like come to me and be like, hey, like I've got some gender feels going on, and I can talk to them about my experience with my gender feels and help them maybe guide through a little bit of what the next step is, or what are the questions to maybe ask yourself, or what my journey through all of that was. So that's the great stuff. I don't like to say I'm a role model for other trans folks, but just to be another trans personality out there for people to sort of gravitate to means a lot to me. On the converse side, I have gotten so much hatred online, even before streaming. I kid you not, from the second month that I started transitioning, I have received so much hate, both online and in real life, that my relationship to the rest of the world changed drastically. I'm open with this story about, I had a Tumblr back when Tumblr was actually a thing that people did a lot of compared to now, where I was posting transition photos, and a TERF blog. TERFs being trans exclusionary radical feminists. They basically don't see trans women as actual women. Some TERF blog reblogged me and called me a pedophile, and then I had hundreds of people flying at my Tumblr to basically say all sorts of horrible stuff to me. And this is welcome to being a trans woman. And I had some other really unsafe situations in real life, and this was just okay. I went from never having to care about what space I occupied in this world. I could walk down the street, I could go online, blah blah blah, without any concern for my safety. Now, unfortunately, it's a different story. I've been on my stream, I get a lot of trolls, I get a lot of hate, particularly Pride Month. I get, I've had a number of follow bot attacks on my stream to follow bot attacks are always interesting to me. It's just they're just trying to rattle you, and it's not my first rodeo anymore. I shut that stuff down in 5 seconds and move on with my stream. But I've been live and my auto mod has caught death threats or graphic descriptions of violence people want to do on me, and luckily my audience never sees it, but I've had to be there live and act like everything is fine during some pretty terrible things being said to me on stream, or on other online forums. So it's tough. And you also then there's the more delicate things where even other streamers and stuff, I can feel a slight change in how people respond to me comparatively than when I was pre-transition. When everyone thought I was just a cis dude, I could navigate the world. People respected my opinion more than they do now, and I was more welcome in the spaces than I am now. So there's also that more subtle discrimination that has happened since becoming a trans woman who has a very extensive online presence now.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of things I really wanted to talk about, but we'll just kind of go in reverse order, because microaggressions I think are a huge part. Like you said, all of a sudden not being welcome in spaces, and I don't know obviously the full trans experience. I wouldn't pretend to, but as somebody who is white passing, and on initial glance people see mustache and stuff, they just go, okay, you're just you're cis straight white dude to me. And then as they find out just things like genderqueer and stuff, I have to deal with those microaggressions. And I know from my trans friends and from what you're saying and things like that, it can be so much worse, especially when we're in a state with the world, not to get too much into things like that, but we can, where you literally have things like a don't say gay bill, and you have these constant attacks on rights. So it's really kind of hard, like you said, to navigate those spaces, because people will, start withdrawing and things like you mentioned you went through. So that makes obviously being a creator a little more difficult, since part of being a creator, people think it's all yourself, but honestly, the peers you meet and the people that you can connect with are such an important part of content creation. And I'm sure that makes it a lot more difficult. So if you want to speak maybe a bit more about that, or even talk about like people that you've managed to actually make those connections with to grow as a creator, because people might not know this, but having peers you can talk to behind the scenes about things you're going through who understand it is very important as a content creator, just anybody in life, really.
Yeah. It's, in this 2.5 years that I've been a content creator, navigating friendships on Twitch is probably the most difficult part. Like, even more than the transphobia I receive when I do stream or whatever, I think learning that I couldn't trust everybody the way I would hope to. In my 2 years of streaming, I've been burned really hard by a couple people that I allowed deep into my circle of friendship, people who like knew everything about me, who came around and like just utterly betrayed every fabric of my being in so many ways. And it's hard to deal with. It's made me less trusting, and I go through these moments where I have to like kind of fold up my walls and be like, you know what, right now, like, I'm not letting anybody else in this bubble, but that means the people who are in that bubble like mean even more to me. A lot of Glitch Code team members are people who I've really gotten to be really good friends with. Notably, the founder of Glitch Code, 8BitD, we became friends because I saw her kicking a transphobe out of her chat when I was still new in her community, and then I like reached out after her stream, like, hey, seeing you kick out that transphobic person and like to stand up for trans rights meant a lot to me. And we continued to go on talking about stuff, and then all of a sudden we started becoming really good friends, and just it built and built and built to now one of my closest friends. And that's what I would hope for a lot of people on this platform. But then, you get people coming and they seem like your friend, and sometimes you can tell that they're just there for the networking, which is like, fine, I respect the hustle. And then other times, you're hoping for that this is blooming into a friendship, and then whatever you might be able to offer them either goes off the table, or it happens and they don't get what they want out of it, so then they just like disappear on you. Luckily, I lived in LA for a number of years, so I'm used to that kind of behavior to a degree in real life. Like, in LA, everyone is your best friend right after you meet them, until they can figure out whether you can help them or you're below them. Once they figure out what their status is to you, they will change their behavior towards you. So like, I learned that in LA. LA taught me a lot about how to network in ways that didn't feel scummy to me, at least. And so that's the way I try to focus on Twitch, is like trying to find people who I feel are genuine, who seem to actually share a lot of the same morals and values that I do, and people that I hope in a jam will be there for me because I'll be there for them. I'm a triple water sign, so I'm like super protective of my friends. If you're in my friend circle, like, I will do anything for you, and that's like what I hope for from my friendships with other people.
Yeah, and that's one of the things with, again, navigating networking and friendships and stuff on Twitch, is you never know. You said you come from LA, so obviously you and are used to that, but it can be really murky, because networking in itself is not a bad word, because networking, when done right, is just getting to know somebody else on like a genuine level who shares the same, is one of your peers without any expectations. But it's that without any expectations. I come from the tech world, and the tech world is pretty much the same as Twitch is a mixture of the entertainment and the tech world, and those worlds are probably the two most what can you do for me today networking types thing. So networking is this very difficult thing where it's like, I want to network with somebody, I want their peer, and if if something comes up that I think would work for us, I want to be able to ask them without the expectation of them having to do anything for me. And it's really hard to figure out who's there for that and who's there to be like, okay, I can get something and then I can just move on.
Yeah. And like the best thing I ever learned from living in LA and doing that kind of networking is that, like, I didn't know who some of my friends in LA even actually were on the grand scheme of things, because I never asked. I never even asked what they did for a living, because it's like, it's LA. You kind of expect they probably work in the industry of of entertainment in some fashion, but I just never ask. I'd rather ask them how their day's going. I'd rather ask them about their kids. I'd rather ask them about, something else, some piece of art that's out there in the world. And so it wasn't until I left LA and I found out, oh my gosh, like this friend of mine is actually so and so, and this person does casting for this person, and it's like, oh wow, but that's for me, that's how you get to places. That's how you get friendships. That's how you actually like get into the room with exciting people doing exciting things, is by not focusing on what they can do for you, as opposed to like asking them genuinely how they're doing. Like it's a much easier way of unlocking doors for you than to simply like want something from other people.
I think that's an amazing piece of advice. I know a lot of people who listen to the podcast are creators themselves, are just interested in the creator space, and exactly what you described I think is amazing advice, which is more about getting to know them. Like whenever I was at a networking event pre-COVID in tech, it was the same thing. It's not about, oh, where do you work, what specifically is your position. I was always like asking them questions, and then and then it's a networking event, so sometimes like I'm not really feeling it, they're probably a great person, and then you find somebody and you can get on a conversation like, oh, we have some shared interest, and then being more about their interests. And that's another thing I always like to say, is genuinely being part of a community, not a community so that you can try to take part of that community for yourself, or getting to know somebody to get to know them, versus exactly who they are and what they can do for you is, I think, the best way, because that's how I've actually made genuine connections with people. And I think that's what you said is the best way to go about it. Like asking somebody about their day, about a piece of art, finding people that you have shared commonality with. And then if that, through that networking, it turns into something down the line, or you can work on something together, awesome. But even if you can't, you still have that connection with another peer in your industry, which is just an amazing thing to have as friends and peers, without having to worry about what they want from you, and them not having to worry about what you want from them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also point to my particular theater career as a great example. Before I transitioned, I got paid to do theater at the worst like every other year, but usually I did like one decently paying gig a year. And I actually never auditioned. I auditioned once, and that audition I knew I had the part before I even auditioned. And I've had that type of career because I'm really enjoyable to work with. I make people laugh, but I'm also very hardworking. I'm prepared. I will bring a lot of good ideas to a production. Also, I've gotten a lot of gigs out of being the person who could replace someone else who's a problem and needs to get replaced. I've got so many times I've replaced someone in the final week, like it's tech week. We're opening in like 3 or 4 days, and I'm learning every line I can, and I do it. I'm ready for opening night. But that's how I've gotten work, is simply more about who I am as a person than actually, auditioning, and networking. It's just like people like working with me, and they offer me work instead of me just like chasing the dream.
Yeah, and I like what you said there, and that's a really interesting point, because I liken that a lot to also Twitch in a different way, but I still think the connection's there, because Twitch is a competitive space, and people here Twitch is a competitive space, and then a lot of people's initial reactions to look at people who are doing well or doing worse than them, compare themselves to those people, and then start viewing other streamers as, I guess, rival sports teams and things like that, where they're competing with them. But the truth is, Twitch is a competitive space. You're from a theater background. Theater is a competitive space. Film is a competitive space. Entertainment is a competitive space. And how you compete and how you grow is by developing yourself, your brand, and what you're doing. And so I think what you said is really important, because it kind of also connects to Twitch, because I found most of my growth in genuine connections and growth creatively comes from focusing on, okay, what can I do better, setting my own personal goals on trying to push myself towards it and being hardworking towards those goals, versus, spending all of my time. And a lot of people do this, unfortunately, having this energy. Like it's one thing to be like, man, I'm not really growing. I'm kind of plateauing. How can I creatively inspire myself? What can I do to maybe, take my content to the next level, versus I'm at a plateau, so-and-so is popping off, I hate them, and then just like getting on this like focus of like what they're doing. And it sounds like what you're talking about with theaters, like being hardworking, working on your craft, being personable, being the person that people can go to is very much the same way. It feels like that might be the same ethic that you bring to streaming, which is a focus on yourself and your personality and your connections, and not so much a focus on what other people might be doing and like trying to compete with other people as much as trying to grow yourself as a creative person.
Yeah. It's really impossible to never compare yourself to others. I'm guilty of it and everything like that.
We're humans. We do it. Yeah.
Right. Like, I see someone popping off and I'm like, well, they started 6 months after me and here they are popping off. Well, it's like, yeah, it's like, this is the nature of things, and continuing to use sort of the theater metaphors, like some of my favorite shows I've ever seen are shows that the general population will never hear of. Some of the most talented performers will never be heard from ever, which is a shame, but that's just like the way things work. Just because you're talented doesn't mean you're going to get a big audience, just because even like being hardworking is not necessarily a guarantee, I think another gift of my clown training is to never be too precious with my own material. If something isn't working, like I throw it away. I'm constantly looking at myself and my own stream and being like, you know what, like, how can I freshen this up? Where can I go deeper? I spot check almost all of my VODs, just like, and I'm always asking myself, like, is this good content to me? And there's some streams I'm like, yeah, you know what? I just walked through that stream. I wasn't feeling it, for whatever reason. And, how do I have less of those streams and more of the streams that are popping where I'm having a really good time? Is it like something in terms of my focus and the energy I'm bringing to that day? Is it the game I played? Is it some type of fun channel point redemption or stream loots card or something that like really hyped up that stream? Like, what was it, and how do I do more of that? And I've seen a lot of streamers who do phenomenal content for a long time, and it just takes the right combination of timing, game, and circumstances to just push them to the next level as a streamer. So sometimes it's just a matter of timing, and that's, you can't predict timing. It just happens, and it's something that can be frustrating, sure, but I think the key for success is to never give up. Like, when I almost quit theater in my undergrad, I almost gave up, and I came to the conclusion that I got angry at this teacher who almost made me give up theater, and I realized in that lesson, no one can make me stop doing what I love except for myself. And because of that mentality, I have sustained a career in the arts when a lot of other of my, quote, more talented classmates, unquote, gave up eventually or stopped even for a while. The difference was that I didn't allow anyone to tell me that I couldn't do, performing or directing or writing or now Twitch streaming. I'm the only one who's stopping me is myself in that journey.
Yeah, that's those can sometimes be hard lessons to learn, but I think they're very important lessons, because you can't, discoverability is hard. We can do as much as we can to work on discoverability and things like that, and there is a certain element of hard work and luck. But what I've always tried to say when people ask me about how to grow is, like, there's all these things you can do for growth, and a lot of my growth came from an opportunity, but it's not just luck, because somebody huge could raid you, and that doesn't mean all of a sudden you're going to be popping off. It's working really hard on yourself, on your content, doing the spot checks, like you say. If you can make sure your content is good, what you do is the best it can be, then you provide yourself the opportunity to seize that when those things come along. Because again, you can't, like you said, you can't predict when all of a sudden a moment of discoverability is going to come your way, but what you can do is make what you're doing the best it can be, so when they come along, maybe you can seize on that opportunity.
Yeah, and I actually use my Twitter account as a prime example of some of the concepts that I use. Like, my Twitter for a long time was not popping off or anything. And what I did was, for 6 months, I did a variety of different tweets. I did like the the sort of the meme stuff. I did like the really heartfelt, vulnerable stuff. I did what I thought was like humorous stuff. I did all these different types of tweets. And what I found out is that there were a couple of threads of tweets that people seemed to like coming from me. So I started massaging those more and more, and I literally, after a couple months, doubled and even at one point tripled my original like impressions count. Like you got to be, you can't be afraid to try a bunch of stuff, to test the waters, try stuff that maybe won't work at, like you can't be afraid to fail. That's another thing about clowning. He's like, you just got to not be afraid to fail. People don't laugh at you, so what? Move on to the next joke or the next bit, and hopefully the next thing will hit the audience right. So there's things you can do, and I think you're right in like preparation is key. Like you have to be prepared. I've had raids of hundreds of people, and I actually, I hold large raids exceptionally well. I've hold on, like I've had some raids that I kept 75% of this huge raid for hours because I was ready for it. Like it didn't seem to make me antsy, and I didn't know how to handle them. I knew how to welcome them to my community and continue to provide the type of content I provide, hopefully make a fun space for them, and they stayed, Sure, my numbers didn't stay big like that, but I was prepared, and that's like the biggest key.
Yeah, and like you said, some of the best people out there don't necessarily, people don't necessarily know about them, and I think that's very true in content creation, and that's where consistency and being, like you said, not willing to quit really comes in. We've had people on the podcast who they were maintaining like 10, 15 people for 5 years, and now they actually have a really big audience. It's not that their content for 5 years was bad. It was actually very good. It was just sometimes it takes being able to persevere and put in the work and be able to be there when it happens, much like you not, quitting theater because of a bad instructor. Like it can be hard. Obviously it's very hard to be like putting in the work, and maybe not seeing the results always. But I think a big part of this is being consistent and persevering and continuing to put in the work, because somebody can join the platform and in 3 months be huge, and somebody else can put in 5 years before they even get traction. But at the same time, so you can't control those factors. So what you can control is what you put into it.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I started streaming, I was an art streamer for the first 6 months. There were many a stream where I was streaming to 0 people, 0. And it was at that point after a while. And then I did a fundraising stream. I did this fundraiser called Game On and Lupus. I was brand new to streaming, but I decided to do it. And that's actually where I first met Dee, since I mentioned her earlier. She rated me on the first day of that event. And it was through doing that I was like, oh my gosh, like this is actually something I want to do, because that weekend was fun for me, and I had people coming in and checking out my content, and it was fun. It was really fun. And then I went back to art streaming after that weekend, and it was like my numbers were right back where they were beforehand, streaming to 0 people. I was like, something's got to change. Sometimes people are like, oh, it's not about the numbers for me, but like I had to be honest with myself. I want to grow. I want to grow my audience. And for part of that for me is I also want to grow my platform so that when I do charity work, I have a larger platform to raise more money for the causes that are important for me, so I can use my platform for better and more good things. And the one thing I pride myself in 2.5 years of streaming is that I always, when it comes to fundraisers, out-earn the size of my community by a lot. And I'm very proud of that I have at least, I may not have the biggest community, but I've fostered people who, when I'm raising money for an important cause, they will come out in droves and they will give, and because they know how much it means to me. And that's more important to me sometimes than if I had like 500 people watching me at that moment. If I had 30 passionate people in my stream, that's far more fun than 500 people who are just blasé about it.
I really love that. I kind of want to talk about that a little bit more, because I made a tweet recently because there was somebody who came to my stream and we were putting together a charity event. They're like, oh, I was told that as a small streamer, it looks pandering if I do charity. And then somebody else said, oh yeah, I was told as a small streamer you shouldn't do charity. And I'm like, no, like let's shut that down. Because what you're saying is very true. One, people get to know people through the causes that they are passionate about. So streaming for charity, bringing awareness, it's not always about the amount of funds that you bring in. Sometimes maybe you don't bring in a bunch of funds, but you introduce a lot of people to the cause. Also, you just get to know a streamer when somebody's passionate about something enough to raise money for it, and you can see that it shows you like the type of person that they are. So I say no. Like I did a charity stream in my first few months, and we ended up raising like $850, which was a ton for my community size at the time. And so yeah, I love what you're saying, and I hope anybody who does listen to this podcast who may have heard this, what I feel is like there's many pieces of bad advice out there in the online space for streamers. I think one of the worst is don't do charity because you're not big enough, because it's very much an untrue thing. Because like you said, you often outraise maybe the size of your community and stuff like that, and that's because you are passionate about that and people are equally as passionate.
Yeah, the key is like, if you're gonna do charity, find a charity that you believe in. You know, when I outraise other people on charity teams is because like I have out-earned people with 5 times the audience than my typical CCV. And I attribute that because I am really passionate about this charity versus I go into their streams when they're doing the charity and they barely talk about it. They don't really know what the cause is. You know, they saw a bunch of other streamers who they respect doing it, and they're like, sure, like I'll support their cause, but they aren't passionate about it. I like literally will cry over the idea that people want to support my, like if by me giving to this charity, I'm either supporting the trans community or, for example, Game On and Lupus, those affected by lupus. I have a number of friends on this platform who are affected by lupus, and I get weepy when I talk about how much the fundraiser means to me. And you know, that's the difference. And I think it's really bad advice to not do charity, but I think it's the best advice is find something that you're passionate about, because that's also an opportunity to show who you are as a human and what are your morals and values and what you care about. And that's when you show people that stuff, that's when people get attracted to who you are as a content creator, even just as a human.
Yeah, people come, I like to say people come for the game, or if you're not doing the game, people initially find your stream for what you're doing, but people stay because of the connection they make to you as a creator. And like you said, it's just taking on any cause, but it's when people take on those causes they're passionate about that, again, you're, like you just said, you're showing who you are as a human, as a person, and that's the connection that connects you with people in the audience, and the people who stay are the people who equally connect with things like that. And I think that's super important. I think that's wonderful advice. And talking kind of about the games we play and things like that. A couple things I want to talk about, your content. Let's start with something I think is really cool is you have a D&D group called Transplanter RPG. It's an all queer, all trans, POC-led podcast doing D&D. I think it'd be wonderful to talk about that, and then we can talk a little bit about speedrunning and stuff like that after that.
Yeah, so Transplanter RPG is this group. We do stream our sessions. We've moved to pre-recorded sessions, but they happen like Saturday nights at 7 p.m. Central. Just a little plug there. But this is D&D group. The core of the group was from Minneapolis here, and they were some good friends. And the GM was like, I have an idea. I want to do an all queer, all trans, with a focus on POC leaders in the group. And I'd like you to be a part of it, Erica. I'd done one campaign with this GM before, and we got along well. And so we did it. And originally it was going to be just like an audio podcast. And then COVID hit, and it became like we didn't, no one felt comfortable playing in person. So like, well, we'll do it online. And we tried to do it online a little bit. And we're just like, you know what? Let's just stream it. Like, it would actually be simpler to just stream this, get us all together in a Discord call, and like do it that way. And that's how we started. Actually, June 28th of this year will be our 2-year anniversary since we started. And it's a grim, dark fantasy world. It is full of high drama and comedy and everything in between. It's very dark. Our characters go through a lot of traumatic events, and yet there's always this hope. You know, we're all growing as characters, and my character, Vinox Scherzo, is a con woman who will steal your heart and then steal your gold. And the journey that she's been on in these 2 years is like, I could have never planned for how amazing her journey has been, her character growth and the things that she's gone through. It's like, it is collaborative storytelling that is always what I was hoping for with a group, with an ensemble of theater artists. And now we're doing it, but we're just using D&D as the vehicle upon which we tell this amazing, beautiful story. And, you know, The podcast is doing well. It's like everywhere you can find your podcasts. We've rubbed elbows with like Matt Mercer and Critical Role a little bit. Like they know who we are, which is like, what? I play D&D, and like the top D&D representatives in the world like know of us. They know we exist. They retweet our tweets. Like, what is going on here? It's an exciting thing, and it's again all trans ensemble, which the theater group I was in at the start of the pandemic was an all trans group. And I cannot emphasize enough how wonderful it is to be an ensemble of all trans people, because it's like the one place where I get to like put my gender aside and not have to think about it. But like all the characters are trans, and it's just like, we don't have to even say they're trans. It's just like, it's just the lore, every character is trans in some fashion, and it's glorious. It's just wonderful. And it's a space that a lot of trans folks have found and found safety and community in our community, and it's just something I'm just like so utterly passionate about.
That's awesome. It's really important to have those spaces and to provide other people those spaces. For anybody who is live, you can find a link in chat. Anybody who's listening to this later in audio form or watching this on YouTube, there's going to be a link to Transplanter as well as all of Erica's other social platforms in the description. So make sure you check that out. And then that's again, it's really wonderful to have that ensemble space, and again, the fact that you don't even have to necessarily say, because all the characters are trans in some way, because that's, I mean, the ultimate goal of inclusivity is being able to have everything just be normalized and not be like the focus of it, like to be able to exist and live and enjoy a space without having to like justify your existence there. And so being able to have that be part of this collaborative world you're building sounds fantastic.
Yeah, like I've been asked to do a number of like charity one shots with different groups, and they're great, they're wonderful, but when it's like I walk into an ensemble of like all cis people about to play this D&D charity group, and I'm the only trans woman on the table, like no matter how nice everybody is, no matter how cordial and how safe they make me feel and comfortable I feel, there's still just that little tiny bit of tension of self-awareness of I'm different, I am other. And I've gotten used to that feeling, but for 32 years I didn't have to deal with that feeling as much. Well, I stuffed down that feeling a ton, as a teenager, and just didn't want to talk about it for many, many, many years. But eventually, like, I've become cognizant that this feeling exists, and it's rough, but it's what you have to deal with. So again, being in a space where that feeling gets to go away for a few hours every week just feels so good.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Definitely everybody check out Transplanter RPG, and kind of focusing on content. Like you mentioned, you started as an art streamer. You do a variety of different games, but a big focus of your content, looking at like Solely Gnome and Twitch Tracker, looks like 450 hours worth of 21% of the content you've made has been Resident Evil 7, because you're a top 20 ranked speedrunner. I love speedrunning as a observer. COVID had me on YouTube a lot more. I was introduced to probably one of the biggest channels when it comes to like just the speedrunning community, which is Summoning Salt. That introduced me to the concept. I knew of speedrunning. I had friends who speedrun, but that introduced me more to like the intensity, the behind the scenes of it, the competing for records. And then from there, I started watching all sorts of different speedrunners. I actually initially found your channel. I was watching D. That's how I found you, and then your content was based on speedrunning. I'm like, I love that's I don't speedrun, but what I love to watch is speedrunning. So I lurk a lot of speedrunning streams. So I'm just curious, what kind of led you to speedrunning, and what's it like basically playing a game tens of thousands of times, possibly just to like get your time down by microseconds and things like that?
Yeah, so I think the impulse to be a speedrunner was there from birth. I think, I grew up on the Nintendo, and whenever I was sick, I would just run this first Super Mario Brothers over and over again. I wasn't timing it officially, but I was always trying to just, how fast can I run, get to the special warp zones, how fast can I beat this game? And then when my best friend from childhood got on this platform and I started watching him, I was watching him speedrun, and he's a world record holder for X-Men 1 and 2 for Sega, and a few other things, but like X-Men 2 is his baby. He single-handedly revolutionized that speed run over the last 2 or 3 years. And we were talking at one point. He's like, "You should try speed running." And I was like, "I have no idea what I would speed run." He's like, he remembered that I loved this game as a kid called Day of the Tentacle, which is a sequel to
I love
Maniac
that
Mansion.
game. I love those. I love Maniac Mansion and Day of the Tentacle. They're fantastic games.
Yeah, and so I started speed running Day of the Tentacle, and I got 5th place in the world eventually, and then just kind of gave up on it. I just kind of like lost passion for it. And so I had to play Resident Evil 7 as a charity incentive. I raised a bunch of money for Trans Lifeline, and one of the incentives was to play Resident Evil 7. I had never played a Resident Evil game. I knew nothing about the franchise at the time. Now I'm like a hardcore fan of the entire franchise. And I played 7, and I liked it so much that for the first time in my life, I wanted to get all the achievements, which is rare for me. I am not someone who like goes achievement hunting in video games. But for some reason this I did, and so I played it again. One of the things is you have to beat it in under 4 hours to get to unlock some stuff. And so I did that. I beat on every difficulty. I did all the sort of in-game things you do to get all the achievements. And by then I was able to run it pretty quickly. Not speedrunning wise, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to keep trying to like just play this over and over again. And then eventually someone from the Resident Evil speedrunning community found my stream, and he was like, hey, like, you should join this Discord specifically for the Resident Evil 7 speedrunning community, and here are all these like guides and resources of the speed runs where we're at right now with the optimization of these runs. So I started learning that, and I just continued. For the longest time, I joked I would be happy with like top 75. I'd be fine with that. But then I got to 75, and I was like, I know I can do better. And then I got to like 55, and I was like, yeah, I can do better. And at 55, I actually was tied with this horror speedrunner. His name is Maxi Lobes, and he's a big deal. He was one of the first runners of the game, and he is a world record holder in many horror games. He is so dedicated to speedrunning horror games. And when I passed him, I was like, oh, I'm on to something now. And suddenly that community started to recognize me, and like the moderators for the events were like, I'd start going into horror streamers and be like, "Oh, hey, Erica, I've been watching you climb those rankings pretty steadily lately." And one of my favorite speedrunners of RE7 is her name is Catlink, and she is the top woman in the world. When I started speedrunning, she was 5th. I think she's dropped like 9 or 10. It's still a very active game, so people are constantly still getting new times. But she was like, "Hey, I'm so like proud of you, and like when you break like certain barrier of getting like sub 1 hour 28 minutes, which I'm like 57 seconds away from right now, I'm gonna be right there with the champagne, because that would put me in like the top 10 of the world." And yeah, in 6 months, my Twitch tracker says one thing, but I know offline I've put in so many hours that I'm.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of hours off stream, I'm sure, just perfecting the same like segment of the game.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 boss fights that are just, I've spent hours upon hours, literally 8 hours a night on just one boss fight over and over and over again until I could get it right consistently. 700 plus attempts of that game, and I'm still not sick of it. I kind of took a break from it for a little bit because I was after 6 months, I was a little bit burnt out. But I recently de-rusted that run a little bit, and within a couple of tries I was getting around 1 hour 30 minutes, which is only a couple of minutes off of my best time. So it's like, it's something I can de-rust pretty quick, and something that top 10 does sound nice to me. It's just it's so hard at this point. I've gotten to the point where it's so hard to improve my time.
Yeah, and for people who don't know speedrunning and the difference, I pulled up speedrun.com just to check. So Erica's best time is 1 hour, 28 minutes, and 57 seconds. So you understand the world record right now is 1 hour, 26 minutes, and 44 seconds. So we're talking, and those minutes are are really, really hard to come up with time. But when you're talking about speedrunning, it comes down to that. In fact, the difference between the current world record and the most previous world record is 2 seconds. So it's speedrunning is for anybody who hasn't checked it out before, it's a very exciting thing because it's a lot of grinding. But when people can shave some seconds off their time, it becomes you're there with them. It's very exciting when they get on those runs where they're shaving seconds off and things like that. I think it's a very exciting thing to run to watch as a viewer as well. So hope people check that out because it's exciting to get involved and see people progress through a game that they're just so thoroughly into and so thoroughly like know the mechanics of.
Yeah, I've never known a game on like a molecular level. I could tell you hours of like, how does this fight work? What are the actual design elements of this fight? Because one of the first Jack 1 fight in the garage, Jack, you actually aren't bringing his HP down to 0. The actual fight is designed to only bring his HP down to a certain level, and then it just triggers the end of the fight because he still needs to have HP for later on. Like for some reason, they made the design choice of like, he's actually staying alive. We're just so he's not actually like 2 separate boss fights that happen to be the same character. They use the same HP across both fights. That's what it kind of comes down to. And also the car that you can use, I no longer use the car, but the car has HP itself, so you can actually like damage the car and the game registers it for some reason. Like it's just wild, like some of the design choices that you never need to know anything about, but now I know about it.
That's really amazing. I think speedrunning is just like a cool thing. What other kind of content do you like to make? Like, I mean, I could look at sites and stuff, but just kind of, we talked a lot about your passion for charity, passion for your D&D group, Transplanter, passion for speedrunning. So I'm just kind of curious. Obviously, you have a passion. You come from a theater background. I'm just curious, like, what have you been doing like recently? What people who come and check out your channel, what sort of content can they expect there?
Yeah, recently I just finished a Resident Evil marathon where I did all the main titles 1 through 8. Some of them I've played before, some it was a first time playthrough, and I just did that one game after another. It took me 18 days, like streaming days, to finish through that, and had a blast. And now, I can talk about the entire franchise in a way that I couldn't beforehand. Things that I gravitate towards, I like games with really good stories. So like when I played Red Dead Redemption 2 a little over a year ago, that was a really good time in my community. I actually, for a little bit there, thought Red Dead 2 was going to be like my ticket to partnership because my organic numbers was going up and up and up during Red Dead for a little bit, and I was just like super excited. But then I beat the game and couldn't figure out any more content with it, and things just, what do you do? Do you just start to get over? I don't know. So yeah, that's another tricky part is like, I never thought I was someone who was good at video games, but more and more lately, people are like, you're actually really good at video games. You're plowing through these video games way faster than I ever could. I would have never thought that because my best friend growing up was this world record holder. He just kicked my ass in every game we ever played for, 8 to 10 years of childhood. So I grew up thinking, I'm not that good at video games, but more and more people are like, actually, you're really good. Obviously, you're a top 20 speedrunner in the world. Like, you're actually pretty good at video games. So I kind of like am not really, I don't have a game yet that I'm just like, other than when I was playing Resident Evil 7 all the time, I don't really have like a game or a style of game that's like super speaks to me all the time. Sometimes I've done retro recently. I just started Metroid Dread. That's kind of what I'm going to be playing for a while. Metroid Dread. I think in the future I do want to do a little bit more retro. I did beat like Echo the Dolphin and that Echo the Dolphin changed my life as a streamer. That did something to my community that I could not. I don't know.
That's actually next on my notes before we wrapped up. I wanted to talk about Echo and dolphins. So
of course we want to talk about dolphins. Well, I should start with the fact that I have a dolphin tattoo. It's a BDSM dolphin on my back shoulder, courtesy of my community and their generosity while I was playing Echo the Dolphin. I will always, I will always look at that game as first off, if you need to know that I hate Dolphins and I hate Echo the Dolphin, I hate those games, which is why my community made me play it. Like I think it was a charity incentive, and so I was like, fine, I'll play Echo the Dolphin, and then it was like, I was like, for it'll be a community goal if we reach X amount of subs or whatever. Fine, I will play Echo 2, and for X amount, I will play the whole goddamn franchise. And it just became this huge meme in my community. They just loved it, and people were buying me dolphin onesies, and I have a dolphin body pillow. People want me to cuddle with, on stream. There's a channel point redemption to make me cuddle. I've got this dolphin hat, which is my most popular channel point redemption. I actually now am a VTuber. I actually usually stream as a dolphin on my channel. It's ridiculous, but Echo will always, for as much as I hate the game, I think it's a terribly designed game. The controls are terrible. The storyline is terrible. If you don't know the ending of Echo 2, Tides of Time, I cannot describe to you the amount of rage at the end of that game. It just ends in such a horrible way story-wise that I literally was just like, this game has no redeeming features. But it'll always be a watershed moment because it put this energy in my community where I started to have memes that like truly were my memes. It got so bad I couldn't go to some rando streamer who I've never even been in their stream before without them knowing that I have a thing against dolphins. I literally, it's like for the few months where I was going to all these random streams and people were like, oh my, I've heard about you. You hate dolphins, right? Like, how do you know this? Look, people just, word gets around. I raided a much larger streamer once, and someone who was in my community in the raid was like, oh yeah, Erica should tell you about her BDSM tattoo. And the streamer was like, you have a BDSM dolphin tattoo? I'm like, unfortunately. And she's like, I have to see it. So like she opened up her DMs to me so I could send her this, and she like was dying, and she like, friended me and everything. It's like, okay, my BDSM dolphin tattoo is now a networking device. So can I really hate it all that much? I guess not. It's also a beautiful tattoo that, despite all my feelings about it, it's a beautiful tattoo. So
that's wonderful. If there's two things that Twitch communities love, it's the things that we talked about earlier that we're passionate about, the things that we love, and they want to shower us with those things that we're passionate about and love. But the thing that they are passionate about, and I feel like most communities love more, is those things that we are very passionately sometimes against. In your case dolphins. But it's still great. It still has, like you said, you have that body moment, and you will forever, whether you stream for another 20 years or something comes along and you're not streaming, that entire moment, that community, that vibe, and that feeling, you'll have the memories of the game and forever the tattoo, which I think is a tremendous part about Twitch, is that connection, even if it's over something such as a hatred of dolphins. It's pretty magical.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I live for. I always jokingly say that I will do anything for the right amount of money. And the Echo the Dolphin saga of my streaming career was true. It's like, between the tattoo, dolphin onesie, we almost unlocked me having to do a stream in a kiddie pool full of veterinarian lubricant. That was like the ultimate goal that we almost hit. My chat got me so close. I was real sweaty that I was going to have to do it. But I was supposed to be in my dolphin onesie in the veterinarian lubricant, which is just like, how did my life get here? I don't know. But luckily, we did not hit that goal, so I did not have to get a kiddie pool full of lubricant.
What a thing to almost have to do, though. So as we wind down the interview portion, before the Q&A, for anybody who's listening to this afterwards, I compile all the Q&As for the month into their own special bonus podcast. So while you might not hear the Q&A on this one, if you're watching this or listening to it after the fact, there will be a Q&A at the start of next month that has all of our guests' Q&As on them. I like to do just a couple palate cleansers, I call them, rapid fire questions. No right or wrong answer, just how you feel. All the chat might think there's right or wrong answers. So first one I always like to ask is, if you have two lasagnas and you stack them, do you have one or do you still have two lasagnas?
I mean, I'm assuming we've taken them out of whatever casserole.
Okay, they've both come out of the oven. They've been cooked separately and they're out of the oven. They're cooled and ready to go.
Okay, if we're taking one and plopping it just on top of the other one, I think you just made one mega lasagna. I mean, I'm not Italian, but I would assume that would be the definition of just more a lasagna.
Yeah, I always ask that one because I was a firm two lasagna person, and my community was very emphatic that no, that is one mega lasagna. And everybody I've asked has said it's one lasagna, so I've come to accept my wrongness there. So I guess there is some wrong answers. The other one I'd love to ask people is a Pop-Tart a ravioli?
I don't think so. It's a pastry. Raviolis aren't pastries, right? Right. Yeah. I would say no. I'm a hardcore no on that one.
I think it depends if you view a ravioli as a pasta, in which case no, absolutely not. Or if you just view it by the crimping technique, but we're a mega lasagna, and definitely it's not a pasta, it's not a ravioli. And then just to kind of finish things off, is soup a drink?
I guess like if we're talking about like just a tomato soup where it's like there's nothing in it, I could make the argument that it's a drink, yeah. But if it has chunks of things in it, then no. At best, it's a stew that you're drinking. It's. I would have to say it depends on the soup.
Fair enough. All right. Thank you so much. We will be moving on to the Q&A, but I want to say thank you for taking the time. Thank you for doing this interview. But before we end, can you let people know where to find you, things you have coming up, or anything really you want to shout out and put out into the world?
Yeah, so my next stream is this Thursday over at EricaPlz on Twitch. That's PLZ, EricaPlz. And I'm actually going to be doing a co-stream or a collaborative stream with, I'm going to be playing Man of Medan with 8BitD, which should be a good time this Thursday. So I usually start stream sometime in the afternoons into the early evenings. I never do an exact time because I'm chaotic neutral like that. And then also, as I talked about earlier, Transplanar RPG this Saturday, 7 p.m. Central over at Transplanar RPG. We're having episode 4 of our current arc, and it's my group going off to find my dragon daddy. If that doesn't get you interested, what will? I don't know. So those are the two big things right now that I've got going on.
Awesome.
And then,
sorry.
Oh, I was going to also say on Twitter, I cannot change my username on Twitter yet. There's someone else who has EricaPlz. So I'm Erica New Girl, which was my old username here on Twitch, but Erica New Girl on every other piece of social media except for Twitch.